So I'm a few years late to this party, but I finally watched the movie Hereditary. So about 4 years too late as of this recording. I actually saw the director's Ari Aster's second movie, Midsummer, before this one. I heard this one was much better. I enjoyed Midsummer, thought it was very messed up. Maybe one day I'll talk about that, but I've been wanting to watch this movie for quite some time, but just never really got around to it until now. Now, I did watch it with my wife. We watched it after the kids went to bed, and usually that's kind of a dangerous time for me because I tend to fall asleep on the couch, and I was worried that that would happen with this, but after a certain part, it clicked and I was in. Before we get to that, I am Omar, and together with my wife, this is Pronounced in Fear, and we talk all things horror, movies, games, books, comics even, and really the deep themes that we find in that type of media. I really enjoy horror, and I really think that there's a lot of elements that really talk about life and how we impact those around us. If that's the kind of thing that you like to hear, like the video, subscribe to the channel. Let's get right into it.
I just don't want to put any more stress on my family.
And I will say, spoilers for a 4-year-old movie at this point. Love the movie, worthy of being in my collection. That is basically the equivalent of 2 thumbs up. That being said, when the movie opens up, you're seeing this family comprised of father, mother, brother, sister. The main character is the mom who just lost her mother in the movie, and then the story really centers around her and her 2 children, Peter and Charlie. Peter's the boy, brother, the older brother. Charlie's the younger sister. Or it's made clear that Annie and her mom had a conflicted relationship at best. It seems like Annie ultimately did want to be close to her mom, but it just didn't really work out. And you end up finding out through the course of the movie that her mom essentially was a Satanist. Her, along with a kind of like a group of friends, you find out that they really were just looking to worship a demon by the name of Paimon. And so the whole movie is this plan put in place to conjure up this entity and worship it. At the beginning of the movie, she is passed on, and Annie is kind of grappling with how she feels about her mother passing. She knows it's a sad event, but that conflict within her, that she's not necessarily sad, but she is, but not displaying it in a way that she feels is appropriate, I thought was a really great theme to grapple with throughout the movie. You're kind of going through the motions of this family visiting, going to a funeral home, just kind of grieving and going through that, and you're like, okay, it's a slow start, but we get when she's kind of cleaning up and she's in, I want to say, her workroom, or maybe the kind of like a storage room, and she looks and thinks that she sees the spirit of her mom in the corner, and when she turns the light on, the spirit is gone. That kind of told me what direction we were going in. If you've seen any of our previous videos, I love horror, specifically of the supernatural kind, so ghosts, demons, anything involving an afterlife or things like that of a spiritual nature. Those are the kinds of things that I really enjoy. So I thought it was going to be a ghost movie, which kind of is in the sense, well, yeah, it is essentially a ghost movie, but it dives more into the spiritual realm, which I find really interesting. Annie is, and you can see that she really is grieving in her own way. In an attempt to get her to kind of come out of her shell, Peter wanting to go to a high school party, Annie kind of forces Charlie to go with Peter, kind of to get her out, to get her to just kind of meet other kids in her school. And that night after the party, there's a tragedy involving Peter and Charlie, in which Charlie gets killed by decapitation. I'll talk about that in a sec. The other conflict that Annie going through is her conflict, her inner conflict of being a mother. It's made clear that having had a complicated relationship with her mom, I think she feared the relationship she would have if she had kids and how she would be as a mom. And even throughout the course of the movie, as she engages with her son, she even has kind of like these inner visions, nightmares. She faces this inner turmoil that she maybe didn't even want to be a mom. Now, having come to the other side of that, she realizes what a gift it is. So she's kind of grappling with the guilt of maybe not wanting to be a mom, and now being a mom, she still feels like unworthy in a sense because she went through that. And I totally relate to that, especially being a father. You're always grappling with your inner self, and you want to be the best parent you can be, but then there are days when you are not on your best behavior that rack up within you, and you always essentially feel that guilt, even though your kids may never experience it. By you maybe having that thought, having that reaction, just feel like, am I even worthy to be a parent? So prior to Annie sending Charlie or forcing Charlie to go to this party, you see that they themselves have a conflicted relationship. And I think it has to do with Ellen, the grandmother's involvement. Annie, in the course of the movie, confesses that when Peter was born, she did not let her mom see him. But in order to try and maybe reconcile their relationship, she let her get involved with Charlie. So Ellen and Charlie seem to have bonded more than Peter and Ellen. But Annie and Charlie don't seem to get along very well. I don't think they hate each other, but it's clear that they're kind of at odds. So Annie catches Charlie outside with no shoes on, and she's kind of pulling her in violently. And she doesn't call her an idiot, but says, are you an idiot? Or, I mean, I guess that is calling them an idiot. Calls her Charlie an idiot for being outside with no shoes on. So it's just clear that, again, that conflict of wanting to be a great mom versus how you actually are is in full play. Through the course of the night, Charlie gets her hand on a chocolate cake with nuts in it, goes into anaphylactic shock, and Peter's trying to rush her to the hospital. And through the course of that drive, Charlie's essentially suffocating, sticks her head out the window in an attempt to kind of maybe get some fresh air. Peter swerves on the road to try to dodge something that's there. I don't remember at the moment. Passes by I believe it's a telephone pole, electric pole, and Charlie gets decapitated. The thrust of action into the movie. So from there, and I was me and Cherie were pretty much hooked. Props to Annie, the actress that played Annie. What's her name here? Props to the actress Toni Collette, because that emotion that she's able to display when she finds Charlie's decapitated body in the car was, I have to say, bravo to her. I mean, me and Cherie were even talking how we would react upon seeing one of our kids or experiencing the death of one of our children. And I mean, I think she captured it really beautifully. I mean, if I can use that word, because she's screaming and you can kind of feel it from the bottom of her soul, and just saying things like, I want to die. I need to die. I can't. This is too much. And I mean, that is essentially how I feel when I even just think about one of my kids getting hurt, not even just dying. And on top of that, in such a brutal manner. I mean, you think about kids who die through illness or disease versus dying violently. It's bad enough thinking of them getting sick and just kind of dying through what you would say is kind of natural causes, the body kind of just shutting down due to an illness, versus their life just getting taken abruptly. In that, props to her, that hit hard. So Peter, having been really the driver of this incident, pun intended, unsure of how to react, just kind of goes home, crawls into bed, and essentially just waits until morning. It was pretty unnerving because you're a teenager. How do you react? I mean, you could just go into your parents' room and say Charlie's dead. So that, I think, was well written, because being an unsure teenager, it's kind of easy to, like, in hindsight, it's easy to be like, oh, he should have done this, he should have done that. But when you're going through that stage in life, you're just unsure about everything. So everything just seems like a bad decision. So that was, I think, pretty good writing there. Once kind of the main purpose of the movie kind of gets underway. Movie just becomes a series of creepy events as you see Annie try to cope. So she goes to almost like an Alcoholics Anonymous type group meeting, but it's for grieving people. She does that for when her mom passes away, but after Charlie does, she's going there, decides not to, goes home, and that's when, before she's able to leave the parking lot, is not confronted, but is approached by a woman named Joan. Presents herself as just a grieving mother looking to cope, and tries to strike up a dialogue and really just a friendship, which becomes successful. And Annie does eventually contact Joan, goes to her house, almost like an accountability partner type relationship, where it's just, if you're not comfortable being in a group setting, how about more of a one-on-one thing? And you find out through the course of the movie that that relationship was essentially part of the plan from Ellen and her group of Satanists. Let's just call them that, Satanists. Joan introduces Annie to essentially necromancy, conjuring up the dead, by having Annie experience her conjure up the spirit of her grandson. Annie kind of is traumatized by the experience, but also desperate to connect with her dead daughter, as she kind of brings it back home and exposes her family to it. Now, one thing I will say as a point of maybe a little bit of confusion on my part is she tells Steve, her husband, that she's a medium. So, not having seen the movie a second time, this is just kind of a first time reaction, was she raised in this world, rejected it, and then kind of embraces it, which is why it makes it so easy, because she's able to get right into it pretty quickly. So maybe she has experience with this, but when she tells Steve, I'm a medium, I wonder if that was just something that she was brought up in, rejected it, and then just came back to it. Definitely going to be watching this movie again, so something I'll look out for and see. But she brings this back into her home and conjures up the spirit of Charlie, or at least that's what we are led to believe. Now, side note, as a believer, one of the things that the Lord forbids is any kind of spiritual activity of this nature, of mediums and conjuring up spirits and demonic entities. So things like that you find in the New Age movement of astral projecting, kind of entering the spirit realm, those things are extremely forbidden. And I understand why. I believe that when God institutes standards for living, the standard for living is Christ, because Christ is holy. There's purposes for what God kind of sets into motion. I've never been one to think that God is just wanting to exert his authority just because he has it, but because he knows, one, be holy because he is holy, because Christ is holy, but two, it's ultimately for our own good. And when you deal with these kinds of things, you're ultimately inviting evil into your home. Once Annie was exposed to this, you already know where the movie's going. Well, one, because it's a horror movie, so you understand that bad things have to happen. But really looking at what's going on, you don't know what you're inviting into your home by conjuring up these kinds of things. So when Joan and Annie are kind of reaching to their dead relatives, who's to say that a demon's not that spirit and just answering your questions? So when you say, Charlie, if this is you, react this way, why would they react any other way? Now, one of the rules in this whole activity is grabbing an item that has kind of some personal connection to the relative or the spirit in question. So that's how they're able to kind of go through that. For Joan, she grabs a chalkboard that belonged to her grandson, and then for Annie, she grabs a little sketch pad that Charlie used to draw in all the time. So that's kind of that connection to that spirit that's visiting them. Now, through the course of the movie, you see bad things start to happen to Peter. One, he's going through the trauma and the guilt that he's the reason why Charlie's dead. Then you also see that he's kind of getting hunted, or really by Joan, and then ultimately by these Satanists. And the purpose being that they're offering, essentially conjuring up this demon, one of the kings of hell, Payman, through these rituals, through sacrifices essentially, and then Charlie's soul is to inhabit the body of Peter and then rule as Payman, because they believe that Charlie is Payman. Now, you find this out because Annie is seeing that whatever she invited into her home is ultimately looking to destroy her family. And going through her mom's things, sees that her mom was a part of this group of Satanists trying to conjure up this entity, and that this entity is looking for a male body, so on and so forth. So you see Peter kind of going through this experiences at school where he's kind of losing control of his body, at one point beating, ramming his head into the desk, breaking his nose. And I really feel for him, because this is a kid who's like, not that he's completely innocent. He's, into smoking marijuana and partying and trying to, establish a relationship with this girl he has a crush on. A teenage boy who's been raised in that environment without that Christian foundation. But he didn't choose any of this. And even throughout the course of the movie, you learn that Annie suffers from sleepwalking, and there was an incident in which she, claiming to be sleepwalking, doused Charlie and Peter in paint thinner and was about to light them on fire. She wakes up right there, Peter screaming, he's holding that against her, which it's understandable. Your mom, this woman that you believe is the one that loves you more than anything, was about to kill you. So I get his resentment towards her. But then you see that she, Annie also has conflicting feelings. She's having a nightmare, or you see that it's essentially like a nightmare where she reveals to Peter that she never wanted to be a mom. So this overarching theme of what it means to lay down yourself in servitude of your family, of these kids that you bring to this world, is really heavy. You also see that Annie confesses that she tried to have a miscarriage with Peter in order to abstain from the responsibility of being a mom, but ultimately realizes that being a mom is a blessing. And even though this story is really ultimately a tragedy, she tries to fight for the safety of her family. Unfortunately, it doesn't work out. Pretty much everyone ends up dead. Really had me feeling a little bit depressed at the end, but also reminding me, as most things do, of what a gift I have in being a father, and how important it is for me to do everything that I can to fight for their safety and make sure that I'm not, one, conflicting with my mission, with my actions, with my words, that everything that I think, it be in alignment with what I do. So when my kids want to hang out with me, may I not go against that mission with my attitude or with my words or anything like that. Alright, so I decided to go back and watch the movie for a second time to see what it was that I missed, try to kind of piece together the puzzle that I was trying to kind of put together after the first watch. And it turns out there were a lot of clues and a lot of things going on. The storyteller was placing kind of throughout the movie. So I really wanted to come back and re-record my thoughts after a second viewing. I really enjoyed the movie, so that was the TLDR version of Hereditary. Going back, I see that there were a lot of clues and a lot of pieces of the puzzle kind of laid about, and I just wanted to come back and just kind of talk through them. So looking at my notes, when we started the movie, we were at the funeral, and right from the eulogy delivered by Annie, you already can tell that this whole thing was pretty much just planned out by this cult that was led by Ellen. And it's really just kind of adds to the tragedy that I felt that this movie was going for, and just kind of lets you see that everything that happened was pretty much planned out by this satanic cult to bring about the possession of this demon. And really, from Annie kind of looking around the room and seeing that there was a lot of faces that she was not familiar with, you kind of realize after watching it again that these are the cult members kind of coming to pay their respects, or really just kind of witness everything that's going on and making sure that it's all going according to plan. As you're watching the movie, I see that the clubhouse is kind of like the mini headquarters of the group. Charlie spent a lot of her time there, and you kind of realize that Charlie most likely, to me, I picked this up, that I think she knew who these people were. And I think she was maybe not necessarily in on it, but I really think that she might have been aware of what was going on. She has that conversation with Annie after the funeral, whereas Annie's really just trying to console her. She knew that Charlie was close to her grandma. Charlie asks her mom, "Who's going to take care of me when you're gone?" I think she knew, in a sense, what was coming. At the moment, it seems like she's mourning her grandma being gone, and just kind of a standard question placed by kids when a loved one dies, like, well, what about when you die? But now, after rewatching the movie, I think it's her seeing what's coming and kind of having that worry that pretty soon her family's going to be gone. Who's going to take care of me? And Annie's attempts to console her, it's like, oh, well, Peter's going to take care of you. And she just kind of looks at her and turns away. And I just think that she knows that her family is going to be taken from her. She doesn't seem too distraught over it, but it's a natural concern. That's one thing. When Annie reads the letter from her mom that she, wrote and kind of left in her spiritual book, she writes, quote, "Please do not despair your losses." Kind of just foreshadowing what's about to take place in this family's lives, but also seeing the depths of evil in this group, that they are willing to sacrifice these people for their promised riches. As the movie goes on, Annie discovers in her, some of Ellen's possessions, the book on how to summon payment and what can come about as a result. And one of the things that it seems that they're looking towards is this promised rewards. So really just kind of digging even further into the depravity of this group. And I'm just saying flat out the depravity of this group, as they are intentionally looking to summon this demon at the expense of their loved ones. More foreshadowing is done as Peter attends his school in one of his classes, and they're kind of reviewing this play, and a student kind of answering the teacher's questions on the themes that they're extracting from this play. And one of the things that they say that really caught my attention were the line, "The characters were just pawns, therefore they had no hope," kind of letting this, the student talking about how in the play these characters were destined for tragedy and ultimately didn't have any choice in the matter. And I see that as kind of parallel to what's going on with Annie and her family. They never really had a choice in the matter. In a sense, they were always just pawns and destined for doom, gloom, and death. Annie, in the group meeting on, mourning their family, talks about her upbringing and how she's always been surrounded by death. And between her explanation of Ellen and her brother and her dad, and even Joan talking about her son and grandson dying, I really think that this was all just a long time coming. And I think even Joan sacrificed her son and grandson to this demon. That's just kind of a thought that I had. I think they're all committed to this plan of bringing forth payment at the expense of their families' lives. So again, just kind of further layering the depravity of this group and how they're really just evil and rotten to the core. I know I talked about in my first reaction on commending the actress portraying that grief of losing her child, but seeing the car scene again and seeing Peter's reaction, just that instant regret on his face, and how the actor really did, I think, also did a good job from that perspective of a teenager who doesn't really know doesn't really know what to do, and how he was just immediately stricken with grief, but also with that sense of denial, where almost like if he didn't think about it, it wasn't true until the morning after, when he hears his mom screaming, kind of like that accepting of reality and hoping that it wasn't real, but ultimately finding out that it was real and it was, in a sense, his fault. So props to him as well, who I think really did a good job going through that phase in my life as well. I've never done anything that terrible, but there's been times where I've made an error, made a mistake, and I just kind of freeze. And I just hope that maybe if I ignore it, it just won't be real. And then kind of coming to that realization that, nope, it is real and you have to deal with it. So, good job there. My microphone. Joan at the seance kind of revealing her true colors, where Annie's like kind of getting freaked out and asks her to stop, and you kind of see Joan just look at her and just say, what? Like, it's almost like she broke character. So I thought that was pretty interesting. Really seeing Ellen and the pressure she had on Annie to have children, and how she desired Charlie to be a boy, and almost like she was trying to nurture this person because she knew that she wanted to use it as the vehicle for this spirit, this demon. So you kind of see Ellen latching onto Charlie, but then ultimately paving the way towards Peter ultimately, as you find out through the words in the book that Annie found. Payman desires a masculine body. If he's presented with a female body, he tends to lash out in vengeance. And I see kind of, and well, I'll talk about that in a moment, how that path of destruction, kind of fulfilling those words until he ultimately ends up in Peter's body. And then even Annie, when she had a nightmare, I take it as a nightmare, where she's talking to Peter, saying those terrible things like, I didn't want to be a mom. And when Peter said, why did you try to kill me? And she said she tried to save him. That was pretty telling, as she kind of always knew, in a sense, that she had to protect him against Ellen. And that was kind of Annie's conflict, where she saw that Ellen was her mom and she should feel these emotions towards her mom, but knew that deep down she was an evil person. Annie's upbringing, she kind of always knew that her mom was bad news, but still felt those feelings that she thinks a child should feel towards their parent. A good scene there. And you just see like more clues that Charlie, I think, was aware of kind of what was going on. All the trinkets that she made ends up in Joan's apartment. The bird that she cut the head off and then drew a picture of it with a crown symbolized what would happen at the end, where that path that she's kind of walking, where she would ultimately be crowned as the deity, as the leader of this cult. These are all little things that tell me that I think Charlie was not in on it, but aware of at the very least. What I think happened is Ellen presented herself as the host for Payman. She dies, her body gets dug up, decapitated, and I think it's in the decapitation that the spirit's able to kind of be released. That's my interpretation, because Ellen's body is decapitated, Charlie gets decapitated, Annie gets decapitated, until eventually Peter gets possessed. So I think the book mentions that Payman kind of like that spirit latches onto whoever's most vulnerable. I think it latched onto Charlie, which then latched onto Annie, and you see the how Annie just becomes more violent, and her sleepwalking becomes more aggressive, and she's just kind of almost like attacking Peter, where she doesn't think she's doing it, but Peter's accusing her at one scene of trying to pull his head off. And I think that's the manifestation of Payman's anger, because he wants a healthy male body. And then even when Peter's kind of running away from her at the end, you see Annie's body kind of looking at him and just slowly carving her head off until it gets carved off, and that's when you see the spirit float down into Peter's body. So I think that's kind of the trajectory that this whole action takes place through. That's what happens at the end. Really just kind of this tragedy of this family. They're all being sacrificed until this cult gets what they want, and that's where the movie ends. Thing that I take away from this movie is the reminder to cherish my children. Never take them for granted. I recognize that I have been blessed immensely with not just having children, but desiring to have them. I understand everyone is wired differently. I do believe that we're created with a need to create and leave a legacy. And I think that legacy should be imparted to our children. At least that's how I think we should be. At least I think that's how we should be. How we're meant to fulfill our purpose. Sin has diverted us from that purpose in favor of personal gain. And that's why I call this cult extremely evil, because they have rejected, and they even say as much, they reject the Trinity in favor of this demon worship, because ultimately they're looking for their own personal gain. Ellen and the cultists represent the evil desire that is selfishness, especially selfishness at the expense of other people. Whereas Annie, I do see as the other side of that coin. She's extremely flawed, and even though she is flawed, you see that she is trying to protect her family. Though they may not be the best methods, but you see her trying to do that. She's trying to fight. She's, even at that scene in the fireplace where she's willing to sacrifice herself, knowing that or at least thinking that if she throws Charlie's sketchbook in the fire, she'll light on fire, accepting it, saying her goodbyes to her husband. But you see that gets turned as her husband is the one who actually ends up dying. She is in many ways a broken person, definitely not a perfect mom, yet she understands what she has. Now, the people or the person or the people who conjure payment, they are promised riches. That's why I see Ellen as a representation of the evil of greed and selfishness. You learn about her tragic history, and I think all the death that was experienced ultimately was part of her ritual and the sacrifices she made in service of the riches she was pursuing, that she believed she was promised. At the end of the day, only damnation waits for those who reject Christ and reject the offer that he has made freely of salvation through faith in Christ, the repentance of our sins, and that hope that we'll spend eternity in paradise with him. That is my takeaway from the movie Hereditary. Again, I thought it was a very good movie. I really enjoyed it. A definite buy. And I definitely look forward to more movies from Ari Aster, the director, and movies like it. These are the kinds of things that I really enjoy from horror movies, and really taking the time to just kind of chew on the story, the meaning, the significance, and take away something for my own life. Even if that wasn't necessarily what the director wanted, that's still something I enjoy doing. Kind of just reminding myself of the truths that I know, and also being presented with truths that I never really thought about, ultimately in my pursuit to honor and glorify God and live my life according to his good purposes. So, thank you for checking out my thoughts on Hereditary. With that, I really hope you enjoyed your time with me. I have another channel called The Reasonable Normie, where I talk things non-horror related. So if that's the kind of things that you like to listen to, please check me out there. Otherwise, this has been Pronounced in Fear. You out there have a good scream and be good.